Very good. Listen, everyone, welcome to this press briefing taking place in the context of the second meeting of the open-ended working group on the benefit sharing from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources. This meeting is taking place in the context of the Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal, Canada, at the headquarters of the International Civil Aviation Organization. My name is David Ainsworth. I am the head of the communications unit here at the Secretariat, and I'll be your moderator for this event. For this event, we are enjoying the participation of three main speakers and then some technical backup. What I'll do is I'll introduce them and they can quickly just say hello so that the camera here in our room, our hybrid camera, can recognize them. So first of all, we're very pleased to have with us the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Astrid Schomacher.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you all virtually.
We are also delighted to have the co-chairs of the Committee of the Whole of this working group joining us. We have William Lockhart of the United Kingdom.
Hello, everyone. Good time of the day.
And we have Martha Mafatso Kalemba, who's joining us.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here.
We've got some technical resources joining us as well. We have David Cooper, who is the he is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Convention.
Good day, everyone.
We also have Tauko Shikongo, who's joining us, who heads the unit for DSI.
Good day, everybody.
So welcome. We'll start with some brief remarks by the Executive Secretary and then remarks by the co-chairs, and then we'll move to questions. We'll talk about the question period later on. So Executive Secretary, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, David, for giving me the virtual floor. And then more officially, good afternoon or good evening, wherever you're connecting from. We know in most of your countries it may already be very, very late. So thank you all for making time to being in this online press briefing. It comes at a very interesting moment. The negotiations are still underway, but we didn't want to wait for them to finish because otherwise that press conference for you would have been in the middle of the night. But let me start by thanking the co-chairs of the Committee of the Whole of the Ad Hoc Open-Ended Working Group, where the negotiations are taking place, for making themselves available, despite the fact that today is obviously quite a hectic day for them. Our speakers will share with you their take on where the negotiations are and, more importantly, where they're likely headed. And I just wanted to start with offering a general perspective from the Secretariat's vantage point, I would say. So as we see it, we are edging closer to operationalizing the multilateral mechanism for the fair and equitable sharing of benefits from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources, including a global fund. So that's a mouthful. So we call that the DSI multilateral mechanism for ease of reference. Now, this mechanism and the associated fund, as you may know, were already established at COP15 as part of the historic Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And this week, and again in Montreal, carried by the Montreal spirit, we think, negotiators now advance the text to determine how this groundbreaking multilateral mechanism will work in practice. So the negotiators from parties to the CBD and non-party government representatives of indigenous peoples and local communities, civil society, industry, research, and academia, as well as other observers, had before them 16 issues that were determined at COP15 and that needed further consideration during this 5-day meeting. And the 5 days of, let's say, intense but constructive negotiations here have narrowed down the options for operationalizing this multilateral mechanism. And maybe just to say in closing, the development of the DSI multilateral mechanism for us marks a pivotal moment in the global endeavor to live in harmony with nature. And as you know, this is what the CBD is about and the Global Biodiversity Framework is about. And we believe that the global mechanism will ensure that the benefits derived from the use of DSI are shared fairly and equitably, and that they will yield considerable financial resources for biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. So as we see it, these negotiations are really on the cusp of a potential breakthrough. Not here, but at COP16 in Cali. So we've made enough progress for us to be able to be optimistic about that. Cali is just a few weeks away from now. So lots of work still to be done in the meantime and then at Cali, but nonetheless, we're in a good spot. Thank you very much for your attention. And David, I hand over back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Executive Secretary. We'll now turn the floor now to William and Mafazzo, and I'll let the two of you stage manage your brief interventions and icebreaker. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, and morning and evening, depending on where you are. It's a privilege to be here. And also it has been a privilege over the past years that we have been working on this topic to co-facilitate the discussions as a part of unpacking what was agreed at the last COP in Montreal, where parties made a landmark decision and agreed that the benefits from the use of DSI should be shared. And over the course since the last COP, what we've been mandated with was to facilitate the discussions on how this would be operationalized. And like was earlier said, we are at a point where we have building blocks and we have an idea of the type of structures and elements that would support the operationalization of this framework that was agreed at the last COP. So we are looking forward to furthering this work at the upcoming COP, knowing that we have at least the building elements in place. And hopefully we have managed to deliver on our mandate, and that we'll, at the end of the day, be able to fulfill what was agreed at the last COP. So that's what I can say. And we are filled with optimism and hope that our work that we have contributed is going to bear results at the upcoming COP. Thank you.
Thank you, Mpatso. It's lovely to be here, and it's always a privilege to work with Mpatso and everyone on this amazing topic. It's hard to express. We're at the cutting edge of sort of global science here, and you know, this extraordinary stuff that is DSI and the way that it's being used by the global scientific community to improve everyone's lives and livelihoods. And then we're also, I think, at the sort of the cutting edge of multilateralism. We've brought together countries from every single corner of the world, negotiators, experts, indigenous peoples, local communities, NGOs, women, youth, and the spirit, I think, of collaboration and cooperation over 5 incredibly intense days has been extraordinary. You know, there's just complete focus on trying to achieve a truly global solution that will really leverage financial resources for nature and ensure that those resources are focused on making available that unique digital sequence information to even more researchers and even more scientists and even more communities all around the world, so that actually we can you know, increase the huge amount of work that is going on globally on this incredible resource. So it's a privilege. We're a little tired. There's a little more to do, but I think it's going really, really well. Thanks, David.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you, Astrid. Thank you, Mpatso, and thank you, William, for those introductory remarks. So we'll open the floor now to questions from the journalists. What I'm going to ask you to do, those of you who are logged in, please raise your hand using the tools, and then we will acknowledge and open the microphone and question. When you ask your questions, again, even though your names may or may not appear, please indicate what publication you're from and to whom you're directing the question. And I'd like to keep it to 1 question per reporter to start with, so we can get enough people in there. So I see the hand raised already from, who's that first person we have there?
Michael.
Michael? Okay, so Michael, the floor is yours. Michael, you're muted right now, so we can't hear what you're asking. Do we need to, maybe Sean, maybe you need to unmute him?
Okay, I'm unmuted now.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. Go right ahead.
Okay. Hello, my name is Michael Lohme. I'm a journalist of Die Presse, which is a daily here in Vienna in Austria. And I would like to know a little bit more on the fund you mentioned earlier, about how much money do we talk and how will be the concrete ways to distribute the money.
Thank you much for your question here. I guess we'll turn to, can I have the co-chairs respond to that? I'll let the two of you choose who does this.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Michael, for that question. And I think that's a very important part of the discussion that we're having right now, because we have 2 important discussions going on in terms of the contributions to the fund that we have mentioned, and also the type of disbursement that is going to happen about based on the money that is collected into the fund. So at the moment, the quite a number of options on the table, I can say, which we are still yet to conclude, and hopefully we'll be able to reach a conclusion at COP. In terms of the contribution to the fund, the options include whether we'll have sectors that are using DSI to contribute to the fund, or whether we'll focus on the products, the sales or the revenue that is generated from the products to be the revenue that will be used to contribute to the fund. So we still have those options on the table. However, there was a study that was conducted in between, just before we had this open-ended working group, just to establish and provide an estimate of how much money is generated from the utilization of DSI, which has given us a picture, at least, of what amounts we could be thinking of, but that is also barely dependent on the type of options that will be agreed at the end. And in terms of disbursements, we also have a number of options still on the table. Basically 2 options, whether we can have a formula for allocating to countries and have a criteria on how we allocate to those countries. And number 2 is whether we just have the usual project-based approach in terms of dispersing the funds. So we still have those options on the table, and maybe we want to jump in on this one.
Yeah.
But that's still something that is yet to be decided. But at least we have clear options. We have clear outcomes and estimates from the studies that we are using as a basis of our discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And for the journalists who are here, just letting you know is that we will put in the chat later on a link to those studies, because those studies were published as part of the documents, pre-session documents for this meeting here. James Deneen, the floor is yours now. Please go ahead and announce what publication you're from too. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We certainly can. Go ahead.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I'm James Deneen from New Scientist magazine. You mentioned you're optimistic, hopeful for a breakthrough in Cali. What does a breakthrough on this issue of DSI mean to you exactly?
Shall I start?
Yes.
Thank you very much, James. It's a great question. So, I mean, at the moment, what we have, out of the COP15 conversation is agreement that benefits should be shared, which is, it was an absolute breakthrough and a landmark. And now we need to settle on the question of, who precisely should share those benefits? How much should they be sharing into the fund, and how much should be coming out of it? I think, there's options within all those different questions, and there's a lot of discussion still to be had about those options. But I think as co-chairs, we're very, very clear that the breakthrough would be, and indeed we have been instructed by the previous COP to do this, to make sure that COP16 can answer all of those questions. The breakthrough will indeed be the creation of the full operationalization. We've all been struggling with that word increasingly as the week goes on, but the full, agreeing the full mechanics of the fund, seeing it up and running, as soon as COP16 is over. That's our mandate, and that's the breakthrough.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very, very much. So can we take any more questions from the floor? Please raise your hand if you are online, and then we can acknowledge you and open your microphone. So please go ahead. Okay, so we have a hand raised by Jake Spring. Jake, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself. Jake, you're muted still.
Hi.
You're fine.
Sorry, I'm off mute now. Thanks everybody for organizing this and filling us in on the negotiations. I'm Jake Spring with Reuters. I guess my question is about the United States. The United States is such a heavyweight in all these areas that DSI touches on, biotechnology, cosmetics, etc. The US is not a party to the CBD, though, is my understanding. So I'm not sure where they would fit into a deal on this and how it would apply to the United States and companies in those in the United States. And how can you have a robust agreement without the United States involved? Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll take that one, which is a very good question. So we're very, very lucky that although the US isn't a party to the CBD, they're what we call a non-party, which sounds strange, doesn't it? But it means that they're very, very active. They're very involved formally and informally in the negotiations, and they've been incredibly supportive of our process. I think that the thing that we need to, the thing that I mentioned earlier, that this is sort of cutting edge science. It's cutting edge policy making, because data flows across boundaries, right? Data is very often sort of moves through and around jurisdictions in a way that's hard for all of us to understand. And so while absolutely, I think we recognize all of us that the US isn't, a signed up party to the CBD, the consequences of the agreement that we're going to strike today, we'll have an agreement today and then an agreement at COC, sorry, I think will have implications for US businesses. I think that's clear. And so the US, we've been very lucky that the government's been very involved and extremely supportive of our process.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very, very much. I see we've got a question both in the chat, but the hand raised from our colleague from the Deccan Herald. So Chiranjeevi, can you please maybe open your mic and ask your question? Can't quite hear you. Oh, there you go. Please go ahead, Chiranjeevi.
Hello. So India had made a specific demand for coming up with an institutional mechanism to make sure that the indigenous people and local communities are, included in the whole, the DSI monetization program. Was there a discussion on that, and what was the conclusion in that regard?
Okay, please. Looks like the co-chair's ready for that. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. And I think, like it was indicated by my co-chair earlier on, in terms of the process, we've always had the indigenous peoples and local communities as part of all the processes that have been undertaken. So they have participated in the open-ended working groups, in the informal processes that have been happening with regards to this topic. And indeed, that has resulted in a number of elements being included in the papers or the decisions, the proposed decisions that we are undertaking right now. So the issues of indigenous peoples and local communities are taken seriously under the CBD and also in this process. And there are quite a number of provisions, including that if we are going to have this fund, the indigenous peoples and local communities should also be considered as beneficiaries of that fund. If we are going to have any decision-making process with regards to that fund or the mechanism, indigenous peoples and local communities should be part of that governance structure. So there have been quite a number of provisions, and we've seen good outcomes and a lot of support from the parties with regards to inclusion of indigenous peoples and local communities. So that's what I can say as a positive outcome with regards to that issue. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very, very much. As we're waiting for other questions, there's a question I want to put forward to the whole panel here. I know you've been spending the week and there's been a great deal of progress. It's been very impressive. But could you reflect on the biggest challenges you faced this week? What are some of the biggest challenges that you needed to overcome?
That's a very good question. I want to say the passion of the delegates, but that's not a challenge. That's something that we've just built on because it's been so brilliant. I mean, because I think there's a complexity and a depth and a breadth to this information, which means that as co-chairs, I think the biggest challenge we face is giving delegates a structure, right, a way to build their ideas, which is so brilliant. Into the right kind of framework. Everything in this system is interoperable and it's interrelated and it's nestled and it's complex. And so, that work of sort of building a framework is not something that happens overnight, especially when you're doing it in 6 languages and 200 countries. So we've spent many long months. We've had a meeting in Geneva, and of course we met in Montreal in 2022. Building a framework, building a structure that enables us all to speak the same language so that we can then start, solving the problems together. So I think it's probably the kind of the wide breadth and the interrelatedness of all of the issues. But I have to admit, I feel quite confident that we've got that. We've got the structure, we've got the kind of commitment from the delegates, and I think we're working through that.
Yeah, maybe just to add on that, I think like Will has indicated, I think this topic touches on several areas. There's economics involved, you have the science, then you have to talk about the digital issues that are there. So it has been touching on a number of expert areas. And even now we are talking about finance. The actual discussion on the formulas is a financial issue. So I think there's been a lot of need for expertise. And I think maybe because we've had a number of informal advisory processes, we've brought in expertise from various sectors that touch upon some of the issues that we are talking about. So this could have started as a scientific process and the social process, but then we've seen that we need to bring on board all of the finance experts and all of them digital information expert and everything, the databases. And I think this is how we've seen that this was a challenge, but then we've had enough time to bring all of the expertise. And I think that was one of the challenges we faced, but then I think it came through involvement of several expertise to support information to the process. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. It's true. I mean, the breadth of issues have to be covered in this are truly impressive. It looks like James Deneen has another question. James, please take the floor. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks so much, James from New Scientist again. You mentioned the study on money generated from DSI, and I know you mentioned you shared the link, but I'm hoping the chairs can just speak to how much money that is and how the different options that are still on the table compare in terms of anticipated revenue for the fund. I'm also curious what options exist for making contributions to the fund voluntary versus non-voluntary.
Very good, very good. Well, I'll start with the second question, because there are, we've been very, very clear in our documents to date that there is the option for voluntary contributions, additional voluntary contributions or voluntary. I won't, this is UN negotiators joke, so I'll stop. But there is absolutely, and indeed not just from businesses. We've been clear that in a similar way with several of the sort of multilateral funds that exist for nature conservation around the world. Contributions from all sources, I think, are completely welcome, and our fund will be the same. The studies that were commissioned, as part of the preparations for, this meeting and COP16, identify a list of sectors, if you like, which are sort of, they use DSI, they're heavily reliant on DSI. Their economic activity is sort of predicated on access to DSI. And then, within the studies, there are estimates of their turnover, effectively. And those vary between sectors, so that you have the biopharmaceutical sector, I think, is the largest in terms of sort of market size or turnover. And there are other sectors as well. So cosmetics is clearly, included in that study. Some of the subsectors of agricultural science and so on. And they all have different turnover sizes, but taken together, you're looking at, potentially tens, hundreds of billions of dollars globally, right? In terms of their turnover or, other measures like their contribution to economic activity. I think the key sort of points to make, and the documents that we put out in advance of the meeting were quite clear on this, is first, that there's no intention to introduce such burdens, if you like, on those industries, that those burdens are passed through to consumers or generate inflation or create a cost of living problem. There's no intention around the world for that to happen. The second point, though, of course, is that the nature crisis is real and urgent and pressing, and funding is urgently needed. And so negotiators have engaged, I think, in an incredibly precise and subtle conversation about how to strike the balance between those two things. We've brought in, economic experts and other kinds of advisors. We're very lucky that they will stay up all night with us, helping us with our discussions. I'd say there's a number of options on the table. That's quite normal for this stage in the process. We need to make sure, I think, that delegates and everybody, really, ministers too, come to COP16 ready to have that really important conversation.
Thanks so much. Just a quick clarification point on that. I know you addressed voluntary contributions welcome, but are there mechanisms for requiring contributions to the fund? I guess that's kind of implied by your point.
Yeah, I could say we do have provisions in the document under discussion, where we are encouraging or calling upon, the language is still under a discussion, national governments to come up with measures that support that encourage their businesses or companies that depend on DSI to make those contributions to the fund. So this has been one of the issues that is in the document, just to make sure that we have at least some measures and some processes that allow that contribution to the fund to happen. And like I indicated, we still have options on the table in terms of how now this contribution should be made and to who we should target this type of contributions to be done. And so these are some of the issues. So basically, there are options that maybe we could have these contributions made directly to the fund, or they could be done through national governments. And this is something that is still on the table, but there are those provisions and they are under discussion in terms of making sure that there is a requirement for allowing those contributions to the fund to happen. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's go turn to, I guess it's Lee Harris right now from the Financial Times. Lee, is that who I'm, is that you?
Sorry, I was just trying to, hello, yes, was just able to unmute myself. That's right. Lee Harris with the Financial Times.
Great, go ahead, Lee, ask your question.
And apologies, I'm joining a little bit late because I had some trouble. So so forgive me if this question has been asked already. But I wondered if you could talk about the growth of and kind of anticipated boom in AI and deep learning models that draw on DSI, and whether that has kind of the effect that that's had on negotiations. Has that been an incentive in these discussions? And then I guess if you'll allow me to just follow up on the very good previous question, it sounds like, would it be right to summarize from your comments that that the only kind of mechanisms on the table at present are either voluntary contributions or calling on national governments to kind of compel those contributions, but that you don't at present have any kinds of legal measures to require funding? And I suppose, sorry, to add just a final thought on that, it seems challenging, if so, given that in the US, for instance, pharmaceutical companies pay extraordinarily low effective income tax rates. It seems, for that reason, among others, quite ambitious to imagine that a national government like the US might compel its pharmaceutical industry to pay into a fund like this, given how little it compels it to pay domestically. But maybe that's too cynical a take, and I'd love to hear your reaction to it.
Great, thanks for your questions.
So thank you, Lee. I'll start. I think we agreed I'd start. So very, very good. There's lots of interest in AI, and I mean, I'm not going to sort of draw attention. It's probably unfair to draw attention to one particular thing, but I do think that the work that Google DeepMind did on AlphaFold was absolutely integral in sort of making governments and others around the world realize the incredible potential of this technology generally, and I think therefore the incredible potential of nature, right? Because it's astonishing technology that's there with AI and machine learning algorithms that can churn through these databases of genetic material. But ultimately, that's what they're doing, is churning through the genetic material that nature's provided. And so this is really about, trying to unpick that relationship and really ensure that there's more nature there in future, right? Otherwise, it's a finite resource and we won't be able to keep unlocking new products. So it's absolutely the background to what we're doing, and we think about that. We think about that very carefully. I think the point around compelling people and compelling businesses is a little it's a little more subtle, right? I think what we have to recognize, I think, is that there aren't many global institutions that can force sovereign governments to do things, and no, this isn't one of them. But it can send very, very clear signals about expectations, and it can create frameworks for follow-up on those expectations. And so, no, it's true. Right now, we're not about to create a mega global law. There aren't many places that can do that anyway. But I think I can speak for lots of global ministers who would say if they go to COP16 and stand up and commit to doing something, I think they'll follow through. So I think we're negotiating it in that context, I think.
Yeah, and I think maybe the way the decision is being framed, or the way the mechanism is being framed, is that it has provided a lot of opportunities or avenues through which contributions could be made. I think we just talked previously about having a voluntary option where those maybe that are not within the discussion, or they are not directly dependent on the use of DSI, could also be able to contribute. Then we also have an option for direct payment that will not go through any government. So there would be industries maybe that whose governments maybe are not party to the protocol, who would be willing to pay, or who would also want to contribute to the mechanism. Because like it was earlier said, regardless of whether a country is a party to the convention or not, information cuts across borders, and the decisions that we're making here are going to have a global impact. And so we hope that opening it up a bit like it's being done, like you allowing down direct payment, but also allowing payment to come through national governments, it's opening it up even to those that are not parties to the convention to be able to have an opportunity to contribute. Yeah.
Good, excellent, thanks. I'm going to try to move through some of the other questions quickly because the panelists have to get ready for this afternoon's session as well. But first thing in the chat, Chiranjeevi has written a question. I'll just read it out for you. And he talked about, with reference to India, he talks about the INDSC policy of 2023, makes it mandatory to provide country origin and collection date for new submissions to the database. So this is some specifics for it or whatever. However, the question is will there be any review of these existing entries into this database? And there will be any credit given to the countries where the DSI came? So I guess this is about existing mechanisms and that relationship with those. So I'll turn that to the panelists before we go to the next question.
Yeah, I think with regards to the operations of the databases and also the expectation and the changes that have been made, we've heard in the meetings and in the informal working that has been happening that most of the databases have made some changes, and they are indeed requiring that depositors of DSI into the databases do indicate the origin from which they got the information from. So I think this is an advancement, and it's a good inclusion in terms of how the databases operate. So I would say that in terms of any review, there have been quite some comments that have been placed on the table, but I think we have seen that most of the databases are willing to cooperate and also assist in developing this mechanism further. So I think that's what I have observed with regards to the issues on databases.
Excellent, good, thank you. Before I go to you, Jake, because you've asked one before, I'm going to go turn to the colleague from Interpress Services, Busani Bafana. Busani, can you open your microphone and then ask your question? If you can't, I'll just read it from the chat, but ideally it'd be good if we heard your real live voice. Let's see, are you able to? Okay, so maybe Busani, just what I'll do because we're
right.
pushing.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Busani, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Currently, companies through genetic engineering do not need to access resources from their country of origin. How then will Africa, for example, in particular, benefit from the equitable sharing of benefits from DSI?
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a great question, and that's that's the exciting thing about this process is that that's exactly the question that we're answering, and I think moving towards a really positive answer on. So depending on quite when we finish this evening, so. You're absolutely right that as it stands, and this is why these negotiations have been created. Genetic resources can be sort of the digital sequence information from those resources could be taken from Africa, put into a database, a product developed, and no benefits will flow back to Africa. That's what we're trying to address, and what the documents that we have in front of us at the moment, and that we hope to sort of finalize this today, I'll say, is a proposal for collecting some money and a proposal for dispersing some money. And as it stands, the proposals that we have on the table are very, very clear that a proportion of that funding, and in some versions of the proposals, a really significant proportion of that funding would go to, continents like Africa and, to developing countries around the world. So, I won't get into all the mechanics of all the proposals on the table because we'll be here all night, and that's what we do anyway. But this is exactly the question that we're trying to address.
Great, excellent. Okay, so let's move quickly. I've got two more questions and I'll probably have to close after that. So Jake Spring from Reuters, you ask your question, then Alisa from the Seychelles, I'll get you to ask your question. Let's start with Jake. So if you can make it brief, Jake, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Just one quick point of clarification first on what Lee and James had asked about. I mean, we're going to be asked to describe very succinctly how much force is behind this in terms of paying. Is it possible? Can we write something like, you know, this agreement is not going to be legally binding, full stop? Is that correct? And second, I wanted to point out that, you know, I can appreciate the palpable enthusiasm and optimism for a deal to be happen by COP16, but hearing you describe the specifics, there's still a lot of A and B options you were talking about months ago, and you know, real progress is when those options start getting eliminated. I mean, did you meaningfully eliminate any major options, or when are we going to start to see that? Thanks.
Okay, over to the co-chairs.
Okay, I'll go to the second one because I'm one of those who is full of optimism. Because I know where this all started and how far we have come to even have these options on the table. And for me, I see that even this discussion that we had this week has really tried to unpack those options and then try to understand them. And we see that there is quite, although the decisions have not been made, we know they'll be made at COP, but you could see there is quite a lot of consensus towards certain options. And we know that parties might just need a little bit of more time to be able to make those final decisions. So we have seen that although we have two options in some, and we have managed not to narrow some of the options, is simply because we did not have enough input and enough discussions around them. But we can already see from the conversations this week that most parties are leaning towards taking certain options because they are more practical, they are more feasible, and they also address the issues that we are trying to address. So the optimism is still there despite having the options on the table, because we have seen how the discussion has happened this week, and we hope that parties will eventually be able to make a decision towards those options that are seen to be more practical. Yeah.
Yeah, and then on the first question, I think the problem is the sentence wouldn't be complete, right? So I think no, you know, it won't be legally binding the moment we come home from COP. So you can write, you know, this decision won't be legally binding, but it could require, you know, encourage, ask countries to make it legally binding, or national legislation could follow very soon after, or it's some version of that, depending on who your readers are. But that's the point, I think.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. So Alisa, can we have you ask your question? Then we'll have to draw it to a close, and I'll give some information to everyone about how this meeting will unfold over the next few hours. Alisa, the floor is yours. Alisa, we'll just give you a second. There you go. Alisa, can you turn your mic on? All right, maybe Alisa, while you're working with your microphone and getting set up, I'll just give a bit of a sense. So just letting everyone know that these participants here in our press conference or press briefing will be going back to the negotiating area. They'll be doing a session this afternoon to look at it, and then to finally come up with, you know, the draft recommendation that will go forward to COP. And so that draft recommendation will have agreed text. We're hoping that it'll be all completely agreed, but there may be points of divergence that are put in so-called square brackets that will move forward to that. So that will be available. So that'll be put together there. And in terms of making that final document available, we'll be putting a press release later tonight. So unfortunately for those of you, you'll have to read your email late night Friday or early morning Saturday to take a look at it. But the overall final version of the documents will be ready over the course of a couple of days, so they'll be made available too. We do have a question from Alisa in the chat. Let me just read it out. So the message, sorry, I've got my screen properly here. She says she's unable to mute, but do you have your question? Let me take a look. No, we don't have a question from Lisa here. Okay, so what people can do is if you have additional questions, I please would invite you to communicate with we here at the communications unit, and we'll pass them on to the co-chairs. So I want to thank all of you who've joined us for this meeting. I want to thank our panelists for this press briefing as well. They've been working very diligently for hours and days, and they will continue to do so for the next little while. So reminding everyone that COP16 will take place in Cali, Colombia from the 20th of October to the 1st of November, and that's when we will bring these discussions to a close. So thanks to everyone who's joined us, and I wish you a very good afternoon and good evening. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.